Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the training today. I'm Rondi Nordahl, and I'm the AmeriCorps for Resources, the Aquatic Reserves Monitoring and Stewardship Coordinator. And I get to do a lot of different work with the Aquatic Reserves, including Cherry Point. And one of the things that I've had the pleasure of participating in is the marine bird surveys. And so just a reminder to everybody, we will be recording this. We are recording this, and we intend to put it up on the Resources YouTube. So if you want to like go back and look at anything that we're talking about here, there'll be a video posted, and I can send out the link for that later. And we just ask that while it's recording, we keep mics and video off to reduce distraction. And that if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box. And as we kind of have times to stop and check in on questions, I'll be reading them out. I'll be your host for the event today. And so enough about me, enough about Zoom etiquette. I'll do a quick intro for our speakers today. Pam Borso and Paul Woodcock, our speakers, are longtime members of the Cascade Audubon Society, who also volunteer as expert birders for the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve marine bird surveys. They've put together several other Zoom courses through the Audubon Society focused on topics including marine birds, like the one we're viewing today, and common backyard birds. I really recommend checking out their events page to make sure you're aware, like when Pam and Paul are presenting again, and I'll be putting a link in the chat to that. And we're really thankful that they're here today to teach us about birds. I've been out on a couple surveys and they're so fun. The birds are beautiful. And if anyone wants to learn more about Cherry Point surveys in general, or wants to learn a little bit about the data or the history behind the surveys, there's a talk by John Bauer from our 2020 Science Forum that I'd really recommend checking out. And I'll be putting a link to that as well in the chat, and I can send that out. And with that, I turn it over to our amazing speakers.
Thank you, Rondi, and thank you for having us here. Yeah, we developed this program probably nearly 10 years ago now with John Bauer to train for the Cherry Point bird surveys. We started out with a real small program because we didn't know if we could people it. So we only identified, I think, to begin with 12 birds, and then now I think we're up to, then we moved it up to 18 or something, and now whatever we see out there we put in, but they really only look at the data. Well, anyway, we used the protocol that John Bauer used. And so what I'm interested in is what y'all out there are interested in learning today. And I'll try to look at the chat from time to time to see if there's anything that we need to do to tailor this more to what it is that you'd like to find out about. And with that, I will start sharing my screen. Okay. And the presentation. And here we are. Okay. First, I would like to acknowledge that we live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, including the Lummi Nation, Nooksack tribe. And if you can see in my photo here that this is really near the Peace Arch Park. And so also the Semiahmoo people who have lived in this region from time immemorial. We acknowledge and support the tribe's treaty rights and express gratitude for their enduring care and protection of the lands and waterways. This next is Zoom etiquette, which Rondi already covered, so we'll just kind of go on from here. So we're going to be presenting a bunch of different elements about the marine birds, or the birds that you'll find in the marine environment. Um, so here's our first one, a pigeon guillemot, which you're probably, a lot of you are really familiar with. This is in breeding plumage. They're pretty spectacular looking birds, as is a horned grebe in breeding plumage. Where we hang out here in Whatcom County, we don't see them often in this, looking like this. We'll show you later more of what this horned grebe looks like. And Bonaparte's gull in non-breeding plumage. We see them a little bit. When do we see these, Paul? In the summer?
Oh, we see them in migration. We don't see them
Okay.
in summer, but we also see them sometimes throughout the winter, especially in northern Puget Sound or maybe the southern parts of the San Juan Islands. But here where we're located, I usually mostly see them just in spring, especially, and maybe sometimes in fall.
The spring
Coming
and fall
through.
migration.
Mhm.
Generally, what, April or September, like that?
April late, yeah.
Okay. And here, of course, is one of our most beautiful, dazzling harlequin duck. Quite beautiful. And a gorgeous western grebe. And a Heermann's gull, who, this is in breeding plumage. When we see them here, they breed early in Baja, Southern California, and then come up here in, when, Paul, July?
Yeah, late July, August, and
Okay.
well into summer.
Mhm.
And then they're starting to get out of breeding plumage about that time.
Right.
So the head gets darker, but they're still pretty remarkable bird. We don't have many red-billed, black-footed gulls around here.
Right.
White-headed.
Yeah. I see them in non-breeding plumage on the log booms at the Kingston Ferry and the Keystone Ferry quite often. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of statistics over the last 50 years. A paper was published in late of 2019, basically saying that overall in North America, we have lost nearly 3 billion with a B birds in the last 50 years. So I thought I'd give you some of the statistics for some of the birds we'll be looking at today. So the bald eagle, when we finally stopped spraying DDT, has recovered a lot. And we know that because we can see eagles a lot now in our area. The harlequin duck is up. Common golden eye is down by about 50%. Surf scoter down by about 60%. Brant by 73. The loon is up by about 48%, and the western grebe down 81%. Those can be some alarming statistics. Starting with basic bird identification tips, looking at the general body shape and silhouette of the bird. And if you can see it, the bill, because that could really narrow it down. And then you want to look at specific patterns of patterns on the bird, mostly light and dark areas, because they're more reliable in terms of the silhouette, and a pattern is more reliable for bird identification than colors, especially on our gray winter days and windy, wavy water where they're bouncing and bobbing up and down. You'll want to look at relative size. So if you look at a bird off in the distance and you have nothing to compare it to, sometimes it's very, very hard to tell what it is. If you have it next to another bird of a size you know, like a mallard, then you can see that these buffleheads are quite a bit smaller than a mallard. So again, you know, be just aware of relative size. So the first thing you want to look at is the silhouette or the general shape of the bird. And how does the bird hold its head? Other things, what is it doing? How thick or long is the bill compared to the head? How thick or long is its neck? How slim or chunky is its body? And if you can see the tail, how long is it? So this gives you an idea of a bird that holds its head in a particular position. This double-crested cormorant, quite often, those and even the pelagic have a kind of an upward tilt to the way they hold their head while they're in the water. This one has got a very thick neck and a chunky body. This is a brant goose. And so here's another little guy, horned grebe in non-breeding plumage. But again, how it holds itself in the water, to me, it looks like a little pillow with a neck and head and beak, you know. So the patterns get real apparent as you look further out into the water and you see all this white on a bufflehead. You can see them flashing in the sun actually pretty easily. We're not going to really cover these particulars about the geography of a water bird, but we will be talking about the breast, the speculum, primaries, probably the crown, the bill, the nape maybe. So here's a double-crested cormorant. So when you get to see them close up like this, you realize how hooked that bill is and how orange this pouch is. Of course, this is a bird in breeding plumage, but being able to see this orange on the neck and this kind of big, this large hooked bill is really helpful in identifying these birds. We've used Sibley Guide, National Geo, Peterson, Bird Web, All About Birds, the library, National Audubon website, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website as well. So first we're going to look at loons and cormorants. So here's a red-throated loon, both in breeding and non-breeding plumage. They're 24 to 27 inches, 3 pounds. So in non-breeding, they have a mostly white throat and a slightly upturned bill, not quite parallel with the water sometimes. But you can see these 3 birds have that sort of posture. It's much more pointed, thinner than a common loon. We rarely get to see them in this plumage, but we see them quite often in this plumage when we do see them. They aren't real plentiful, but they do breed in the far north, in tundra wetlands, bogs, ponds. In migration, they will start to stage on large lakes, or in our case, out in the bay, big rafts of well, not red-throated loons, the Pacific loons is what we get big rafts of. And that's this one. So again, in non-breeding plumage, it's a study in gray or black and white. The breeding plumage is quite stunning. Once in a while, I've seen these on the far side of Lummi Island. They eat fish and aquatic invertebrates just like the other loons. And again, they breed in freshwater tundra lakes. And our common loon, here's mostly where they breed along with inland lakes. And they winter along our coasts. This is a large bird, 30 inches long, a 3 to 5 foot wingspan, 6 to 13 pounds. This is a bird that has solid bones, a thick neck and a stout bill, very low bodied while swimming, usually alone or evenly spaced. Their legs are set far back on their body and they cannot walk on the land. There's the breeding plumage. But Paul, would you talk a little bit about the way they're neutrally buoyant in how they use their feathers.
Well, you nailed it. I mean, they're a bird that can go underwater very easily because they're really not buoyant, and they actually they can keep themselves lighter by holding a lot of air under their feathers, and they do that. But when they want to dive, they can actually expel that air, and then they go right under. So it makes it very easy to dive, and they spend a lot of their time working underwater, making a living. And for that reason, that they've adapted this really heavier bones than almost all other birds.
Yeah, and to me, sometimes they look like they're submarines, and all you can see is their head out of the water like a periscope, and sometimes they just sink right out of sight like a submarine. Of course, they're gorgeous in their breeding plumage, and Paul has seen these many times from Wisconsin where he grew up, but I just got to see them and experience them just a few summers ago in Eastern Washington at some of the lakes that they breed at there. And boy, what a glorious, glorious bird this is. And so in breeding plumage, you can see this bill is just, serious business. It's a big, thick, stout bill. On their neck, they have a kind of an uneven edge here. It's like a V kind of. They've got this flat head and a kind of a sudden forehead. They have a very diffuse border. They'll peer under the water, dive up to 2 to 3 minutes, up to 250 feet deep. They can take fish up to 10 inches, and they will also eat just about anything down there that they can find. Is fair game for them. So again, this stout bill, dagger-like, low in the water. So here are the 3 loons in non-breeding plumage, which is how we see them in our surveys, usually much further away. And so you begin to get some clues about their coloring, their patterns. This very large, low-bodied bird with a jagged white line here. This very slim bird with an upturned bill. This is the common loon. This one is, I believe, the red-throated loon. Is that right, Paul?
That's correct.
And it's got a very clean line here with a lot of white on the front of its breast and neck and front of its bottom of its face here. And down here we've got the Pacific loon. Now you can see that it has a more neutrally horizontal bill and a sharp edge here, a lot more gray on the back of its head. And sometimes this little necklace, you can't always see that, but comparing both of them here, you see the common loon and the Pacific loon next to each other. You can tell them apart. If you're just looking at, them out there by themselves, sometimes it's a bit difficult to remember those details.
Really, the Pacific loon has the most contrast between the head and the back of the neck and the throat. And that, like you say, that line is very clear. It's a very clear division. So that really stands out on the water. They also really have the darkest back and head, even often darker than common loons, although there's more variation. While the red-throated loon is more gray and white, so the gray doesn't contrast quite as much. The shapes and size, especially that angular head of the common loon, all really make a different silhouette. And you, after some practice, you really get pretty adept at picking out which is which.
Yeah, and these birds molt into this kind of gray, black, non-distinct plumage as a way to fool their predators. If you're a predator looking down at this dark body from above, it's hard to distinguish it from the water. And if you're a predator underneath looking up, it's hard to distinguish the white belly, which this loon has a very white belly when it turns on its side. Okay, so on to the cormorants, another bird that is low in the water often and might be confused with a common loon, but they have this orangish slant to their bill. It's kind of upturned and it's got this hook on the end. And they often, you'll see them on pilings, not just on the water. You'll never see a loon out on a piling.
They can't stand on one.
Yeah, and the first year has this thick bill, but a very thick neck and often a very light neck and front of the neck and chest, and more brown than black. And they're about 32 inches, so they're not quite as large as a loon. Here's a juvenile, a small head, a dark breast. Almost all loons have white breast in winter. Their orange beak, rounded at the end, whereas the loon has that dagger, straight dagger beak. They feed on fish, amphibians, crustaceans, and they nest and roost in colonies. We have one of the largest double-crested cormorant colonies north of the Columbia River, right here in Blaine on our breakwater. The other cormorant that is out there is the pelagic, and it's a much finer bird. You can see that it winters, well, it's all year around our area and winters around our area. And they're even more slender than a double-crested, as Paul has said. Yes, it's a pencil-thin bill. And they're not breeding.
A thick pencil, though.
Huh?
A thick pencil.
A thick pencil bill. Yeah, their breeding plumage is this orange or red skin at the base of the neck and white flanks. And actually, I was out at Semiahmoo this afternoon and saw 4 in breeding plumage right off of the end of the dock. I was actually surprised. But in non-breeding, they don't have that red and they don't have this white patch. So they nest on cliffs. Quite often you can see these guys at the Anacortes ferry dock pilings that have the ledges. They'll nest in there. I've seen them there. They're black with a green iridescent sheen that comes from the structure of the feathers, not the actual color of the feather. The feather is not that black or green color. It's more of a gray color. They feed on fish, crustaceans, and other invertebrates, and they have a shorter tail than a double-crested cormorant. So any questions about grebes or the loons?
Pam, I want to make some comments about that. The shape of the cormorant with that long, they have a long tail, and it really is very distinctive, especially in flight. So that really differentiates them from most other birds. Also, if you compare the shape of the two in flight, I mean, not only is that thin bill uniform on the pelagic, but the head is almost, it's very, very slightly larger than the neck, and while the double-crested has a much larger head. So their silhouettes are really unique, and it's another thing you learn just quite quickly how to tell them apart. Pelagics, I mean, most of them seem to head out to look for rocky ledges and things out in the San Juans during breeding season. So I'm not sure that there aren't a few that breed around here, but we don't see them very much in summer.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to look at the grebes that we have here. We have seen all of these grebes in our area. I don't know about the Anacortes area, but I would assume that they would be there too. We see them in different numbers. Here's the Western Grebe range. They breed primarily on inland ponds and lakes and winter along the coast. They build a floating nest. Going to play you a little video here, which is pretty stunning. Can you hear that okay?
Mhm.
Great.
During spring on the freshwater lakes of Oregon, grebes join together to renew their partnership. The ceremony starts with a series of graceful duets in which one partner echoes the actions of the other. But the real test comes now. Only the strongest and the most faithful are prepared to join together for the final exultant dance.
Well, that always just startles me when I see that. I've never had the privilege of seeing that in person. However, I believe Paul has.
Yes, actually in Oregon too. So it was pretty great. You know, I just looking at this, I've never noticed before, but I do believe the birds starting out the dance were actually not
Clark's.
Western grebes, but Clark's grebes.
Yeah,
yes.
they are Clark's grebes. But I couldn't find a video of Western grebes, and I thought they were similar enough to do the trick.
But the ones at the end were actually Western, not Clark's.
Yeah.
So
they eat fish, herring, insects, small crustaceans, aquatic plants, and they dive for them. So diving, they kind of jump up and down, not like the loon, sinking out of sight. And resting, they look sort of like little gray donuts with chocolate covered icing in the middle. So you'll see them floating sometimes like this. The Clark's grebe is a look-alike, as we just saw. I don't think we get them here.
not very, very rarely.
Okay. So the next little grebe is a horned grebe. Is it the smallest grebe?
Smallest
12.
that we have here.
Yeah, 12 to 15 inches. This is its breeding plumage, and this is its non-breeding plumage. They breed inland on freshwater lakes, and so here's their breeding area, and they winter along our shores. And we find them at Semiahmoo Bay, Drayton Harbor, sometimes in Bellingham Bay. In the wintertime, this white does not go above the eye, and there's a lot of white on their neck. And to me, they look like a little pillow, and they have this kind of cute little head and short bill. An eared grebe, we see these here very rarely, but they eat pretty much the same things. A thing that they eat a lot of are brine shrimp and insects. And they breed inland on freshwater lakes and in colonies. Their breeding plumage is pretty spectacular. Their non-breeding plumage is this, and it's a little scruffier looking and not so much white as the horned grebe.
So the two, I mean, eared grebes are, if you look for them, you know, especially around Boundary Bay area and Blaine area, you can often find one. I haven't seen any this year, strangely, but maybe I haven't been out there enough either. But really, again, the silhouette really separates these two. You don't see them in numbers at all. That we see the horned grebe, excuse me, but the head is much smaller, and it really looks like a little pinhead, and it kind of has the highest point is right above the eye. The body is shorter with a higher hump, and they really have a very distinctive shape on the water, so you can pick it out. The head looks darker, so it looks dark and small.
You can kind of see the rounded horned grebe and the peaky eared grebe. Another grebe that we have here is the red-necked grebe. And again, it breeds inland lakes and ponds. We very rarely see it in this. We will occasionally see the reddish parts of its neck, but this is how we often see them. But if you'll look at, and we will compare these in a few slides later on, if you'll look at this bill, it's very stout, and the bird itself is just husky. It's thick, and it looks very stout as well. There's a light cheek here that goes a little bit above the eye. But they're just an overall larger bird. So if you take a look at the horned grebe and the red-necked grebe, you can see that with the horned grebe, this bill would fit inside the width of the head, but that would not happen with the red-necked grebe, and it's very stout. And even though they have both of their necks extended, you can see that this bird is pretty substantial, and this head is not as rounded. I call the horned grebes cute. I would never call a red-necked grebe cute. It looks like that bill means business, you know.
Yeah, the red-necked is about twice as heavy as the horned grebe. So.
Yeah, and here's a comparison between the western and the red-necked, and you can see that the western bill is longer and thinner, more white on it. This is again winter or non-breeding plumage. And the red-necked grebe has this stout bill and this thick head, not nearly as elegant as the western grebe. And here they are kind of all together. And I put this one in of the horned and eared side by side so you could kind of see the basic difference in the black and white patterns on them and the bill, which is similar, but you know, the eared grebe bill is pokier, it looks like. A little thinner.
It is.
And so they each have their characteristics, and it's a matter of getting out there and looking at them on the water to, you know, to really be able to tell. But you can do your studying at home too. Yeah. Anything else, Paul?
No, I think I said what I needed to say.
Okay. So here's a pie-billed grebe, and we see these occasionally as well. Now they're a very different looking grebe. You probably wouldn't confuse them with any of the other ones. They're breeding and non-breeding. They're brown birds, basically. They're not gray and white or black and white. And they really do like freshwater areas, slow-moving rivers, even sewage ponds. And they build floating nests anchored to aquatic plants, opportunistic feeders. We see them breeding in eastern Washington when we go on our camp out, usually in June. And we have seen them in the Semiahmoo Marina Pond. I've seen them there in non-breeding plumage in the wintertime.
They especially show up out there when it starts freezing and a lot of the fresh water starts getting inaccessible. So that'll push them out to the marine climate.
Right. So does anybody have any questions about the grebes that we've covered?
No questions about the grebes, but Tim Mans had a question about some of the population numbers you listed off at the beginning.
Yes.
Tim wanted to ask, what do you think about, or what do you think accounts for the almost 50% increase in common loon population and the large decrease in common goldeneye numbers?
Well, I don't know myself. You have a thought about that, Paul?
No, I was thinking about that myself. And I mean, a lot of our sea ducks are trending down. I don't know what the problem would be. I mean, I know that as far as breeding loons in Washington State, the common loons numbers are falling. We only have a few lakes right now where we actually have common loons breeding in Washington State anymore. So I don't know what accounts for that and that growth in population.
Yeah. And it may have something to do with where they're counting them. I know that we have had in the past in Bellingham Bay over 10,000 Western grebes, and they're just not there anymore. And some people have theorized that they have moved to someplace else. But I don't know. Can't answer your question, Tim. That's your homework. You get to look that up and come back and report to us. Good question, though. Good question.
Yes.
Okay, so a couple of geese that we have here. I'm not going to go into all of the subspecies of the Canada goose, like cackling and lesser and this and that and the other. We're just going to do, because on our surveys, we just say it's a Canada goose or not, or it's a brant. And so here's a Canada goose. And again, it's brownish here. It's got this nice white mark here, a lighter breast. They feed on grasses and sedges, even skunk cabbage and eelgrass. And they rely more on berries, seeds, and agricultural grains in the fall. They breed almost anywhere now, but historically they were migratory birds, but we humans have made such great habitat for them around in our parks, around ponds and lakes, that they've taken to breeding locally and really making a pest of themselves, where they end up, at least at our Silver Lake, they end up having to haze them to get them out of there. And the other goose that we see in the wintertime is the brant, the black brant, and they are pretty fun little geese. They have this gorgeous collar, a white butt here, nice patterns on their sides. We're going to talk a little bit about them and the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge. They breed in coastal tundra and Arctic and Siberia. And they have the most critical fall staging habitat is near the tip of the Alaska Peninsula in Eisenbeck Lagoon. Nearly the entire world population of black brant spends as long as 9 weeks there, feeding on extensive beds of eelgrass. They feed almost exclusively on eelgrass and anything that comes on the eelgrass, which would be amphipods, crustaceans, little critters and eggs, if there are any on there. They have a peculiar way of folding the eelgrass like an accordion, about in little half-inch sections, and then swallowing it whole. Because can you imagine not having a fork or a spoon and trying to eat a piece of spaghetti? I mean, really. So eelgrass can be as much as 99% of their diet during this time. And they will leave during about the same 12-hour period from this lagoon, arrive at their winter destinations 60 to 92 hours later. And the way that they do that is very often they will fly, this is where the Eisenbeck Lagoon is, they'll fly straight to here, or even fly straight down to Southern California and Upper Baja to do their wintering. In the spring, when they go north, they go more along the coast, feeding as they go, and then flying into these areas. And you can see really the very top of the world is where they breed.
And they actually,
You go ahead.
they actually make that nonstop too. That's the really unbelievable part of it, from Eisenbeck to Baja. Some of them go the whole distance.
Yeah.
Really remarkable.
And right now they are continually trying to, it's a wildlife preserve, but they're continually trying to build a road through a roadless area. And so we are always sending out, as the Audubon Society, sending out alerts to have our members sign petitions to stop this. And so if you ever see that, then this piece of area here is an area that they can't afford to lose. And so this also highlights the fact that as climate change really pushes our populations of birds around, we have to be aware of the areas that are critical to migrating birds and see if we can look ahead and preserve where they might be going and what they might be needing 20, 40, 60 years into the future. That sounds like a long time, but 60 years ago, I mean, I was 11, so not that long ago in my lifetime. And the National Audubon Society produced a report on climate change and how it's affecting each bird that you might be interested in. You can go to our national website and click on birds, and it will show you their range, if it's increasing, decreasing, and the areas that we really need to concentrate on preserving for our birds.
Pam, I'd like to say
Yeah.
a little something about, oh wait, are we not done with the brand yet?
Mm-mm. But you can go ahead and say it now.
Talking about Canada geese, I want to be clear that the cackling goose is a separate species at the present time, and we have them wintering here. So it would be a differentiation we would probably need to add to this presentation at some point. But it's interesting because there's a flock of cacklers that just right outside of Ferndale here, and some mornings I hear them flying over, and they kind of sound like a little flock of yapping puppies flying overhead. It's really quite a different sound than the big Canadian honkers. But anyway, they all breed in the Alaska area, these ones that are here, and head back up there every year. But they've been down here around Ferndale just about every winter now for at least a number of years, as long as I've been aware of it.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for making that distinction. So brant, as well as Canada geese and even swans, are dabblers. So you'll see them upending. It's quite humorous to me. See their backsides up in the air. Any questions about the geese? Or anything else?
Yeah, we had a question from John Day. This is back with the previous section on how to distinguish redneck grebes and
Uh-huh.
common loons at a distance.
That's a really good question. It, I don't have any problem making that differentiation. Not that I don't have to look 2-3 times sometimes, and especially depending on the conditions under which you're viewing them. Definitely they hold their heads differently. That long, rather straight neck of the grebe is quite a lot different than the shape of the common loon. Also, the head shape is different. If you notice, the silhouette of the head of the grebe kind of slants from the back being the highest, kind of down to the bill, a little kind of a low forehead, while the common loon really at the base of the bill, it's a rather steep forehead going up to the top of the kind of angular head of the common loon. So
Back to the loon here. Hello. I'm getting
it's a
to the
ways back
loon.
there.
Yeah,
See,
the other
that-
thing, of course, is just how beamy they are, how low they are in the water.
Longer
And
neck on the
this-
grebe.
Yeah, I'll get back to the grebe. This bump and this flat head have a lot to do with it. And if we go back to the grebe, there we go. It's it doesn't sit as low in the water, I don't think. And it's not, the loons really remind me of a tugboat. They're just broad and beamy, and this little guy doesn't have that kind of bulk when I'm looking at them, even at a distance. So I hope that helps.
The redneck grebe is about a little over 2-pound bird, while I know it's a hard thing to pick out the size, but the common loon is about a 10-pound bird. There's a lot more bird there.
Yeah,
John
Okay.
says, thank you for the clarification.
sure.
And he
I hope
also
it
made a
works.
couple notes on how the Christmas bird counts show shift of westerns to the California coast, where there's sardine numbers are higher, and that we do see cacklers in Fidalgo Bay too.
Oh, good. That's good to know. So you guys are going to have to put that into your training because we didn't do it.
Good to know.
Yeah. So now we're going to look at some of our diving ducks in our area here. One of them is a scop. There are greater and lesser. The greater has a more rounded forehead, and the lesser has a more pointed at the back, steeper forehead. So these, I would say, are lesser because there's more head here above the eye, and it's steeper. The males, of course, have this gray on their sides. They have blue bills and a black, what this little business here is called a nail.
Mhm.
And can you talk a little bit about that, Paul?
Well, you can see on that female that nail is very narrow. It's just kind of a line coming down, and just a little bit wider at the gape where the mandibles meet, but it's quite a bit wider in the greater scaup, and actually it's kind of T-shaped upside down because it comes out along the sides of the bill. I know that's a hard thing to pin down out on the water, but the other really solid way to differentiate them is in flight,
Yeah.
because the wings of the lesser scaup do not have white in the primaries. It's a little gray, but the white is just more extensive from the secondaries, the speculum area on out on the greater scaup, and ends at the primaries in the lesser. But you've got to see them in flight. It's hard on the water, so sometimes it goes down as scaup species because it's very hard to get head shape and all of that at a distance or see these fine points.
And I don't have a photo of the two in flight because that is really different. Thank you for pointing that out, Paul. The lessers breed on lakes, rivers, and ponds, inland, and the graders breed in the Arctic, and they eat a variety of things. We have good numbers of them in Drayton Harbor and Semiahmoo Bay. Here's a harlequin duck. They're pretty stunning. The females can be confused a little bit because of the patterns with bufflehead, with the scoters, but they really are, to me, the females are the quintessential cute little duck. They just are compact. They've got this little bill, a white spot behind the eye. There's a little bit of white in here. They breed near inland streams or they prefer rocky coasts and rocks. So they do a lot of feeding on rocks and cobbly kind of beaches, and they will breed on rocks, I think on the coast, out on the outer coast, kind of like an Alcid. It's hard to mistake the male for anything else, though.
Well, the harlequins here breed up in the Cascades, and
Right.
and probably some probably do breed on the Chuckanuts, like you say, but I've seen them up in torrents up in the Cascades,
Right.
and it's really surprised to run into this sea duck up there swimming in the water in these fast streams like an otter.
Yeah.
They're really very pretty impressive.
And walking in the middle of the stream, they walk off. They'll walk in the middle of the stream. We have long-tailed ducks here. These are non-breeding males at the top here. They're pretty amazing in non-breeding. I think their non-breeding plumage is more gorgeous than their breeding plumage. And here's a non-breeding pair. We find them at the end of the Semiahmoo Spit. And here's what they look like in breeding plumage. They feed mostly on aquatic invertebrates, some bivalves, fish eggs. And they also breed in ponds, streams, and other Arctic wetlands, or winter on the open ocean or on large freshwater lakes and along our coasts as well. So any questions about those?
No questions yet.
Okay, so we'll move on to the scoters. We have 3 varieties here: surf, white-winged, and black. Surf scoter breeds in the high Arctic, winters along our coasts, both coasts. So these are, I don't know, I look at them as kind of clown birds. They've got a headlight and a tail light and a parking light. And this enormous bill. And this one is getting ready to actually, they can crack these, but I mostly see them eat them whole. They just swallow them down. And this is a young male who is not in breeding plumage yet, because you can see the back of his head is just starting to get white. But this is their feathers come down over their bill, and in breeding plumage, it's at least 3 colors on this bill and their white eye. Here's a female. They've got 2. They're in silhouette. They're the same shaped bill and head and body, and they have a white spot here and a white spot here with a sharp edge that goes along the edge of the bill. I think the way that they digest these is they have a very strong gizzard, because they will swallow these whole. So the males have, they're all black except for this white patch 2 white patches on their head, white eye, a large bill with truncated sides, and it appears mostly orange at a distance. They don't have any white in their wings. This is a male. There's a male and some females. Again, you can see they have the same silhouette. They breed in the far north, winter in shallow marine coastal waters over a pebble and sand bottom, we get good numbers of them in Drayton Harbor and Blaine. Drayton Harbor and Semiahmoo Harbor as well. Here's another pair. So here's a white-winged scoter. It's all black, except for the male, comma, or a Nike swoosh right by the eye, a red tip on their bill. They have feathers that come all the way down the top part of their bill. Sometimes you'll see a white stripe on their wing because they do have white stripes in their wings. And even on the females, you can see the white, the little bits of white on it. And again, the difference between this one and the surf scoter is both of these white patches on their face are rounded, and the surf scoter has more of a straight line right at the bill line. But they're very similar. These are the largest scoters. The surf scoters are next, and the smallest ones are the black scoters. But here you get a good look at them in profile. They're still the same bird. If you don't pay attention to the colors on them, the white here that you can sometimes see, sometimes cannot.
One of the biggest challenges, I think, of identifying sea ducks is trying to tell the female scoters, these two scoters, apart. And really, it is just what Pam was pointing out, that the white-winged scoter, you can see how far down the bill it's feathered. And actually, that gives it sort of more room for that white spot on the front of the female's face to be a nice round shape, while with the surf scoter, it's more of a straight line, and that's the best way to tell. I mean, we wouldn't really realize that the white-winged scoter is quite a bit larger than the surf scoter, and it also has a larger gape, but you don't see that because of the feathering on the base of the bill, which covers a good part of the bare parts of the bill.
Yeah, right in here.
So it looks like a smaller bill, but they're the ones that can eat the biggest or swallow the biggest bivalves because they've got the largest gape.
I don't know if I have, yeah, I do have some, I think I have some, yeah, some other things to show you. So the next one is the smallest scoter. It's a black scoter. We don't get big numbers of these in our area. They're quite a bit more duck looking, completely black. The males are, with this orange knob on their bill. The females have this wonderful white, light cheek patch here. And their bills are not as long and robust looking as the surf scoter or the white-winged scoter. They're more duck-like, and they're much smaller than the other scoters. You can see them here, the female, the male, and the pair. Quite a stunning looking pair there, I'd say. They make a good pair. And here is kind of a comparison of their profiles. There's so much white on the surf scoter, it just blends right into the background of this page. But you can see why this is more of a straight line here, and this is more of a round here. And again, the feathers come all the way down, and these are more duck-like looking. They're not quite as large as these bills. Okay. So moving on to the golden eyes. This is the common golden eye. The male has a white belly, a black back, a lot of white on the sides with a few streaks coming down, a white circle, the base of the bill under the eye. These guys are cavity nesters. This is the female. It has kind of a grayish or brownish back, a reddish brown head, a black bill with an orange tip, and of course the namesake, yellow or golden eye. They do a really fun courtship behavior. Here are the males giving me a neck ache. You can actually see them out there about this time of year doing that. The females are acting uninterested, but they're taking notes. So the Barrow's goldeneye is a little bit different. It has more black on its back with little white spots, which I call barrels so that it helps me remember their name. And then they have this crescent-shaped spot at the base of the bill instead of a circle. The females are very similar to the common goldeneye. The basic difference in them is that they have an orange bill with a black tip. And the other ones have primarily a black bill with an orange tip. So that's tricky. But to me, they look sort of like, oh, stop it. They look sort of like bobbleheads. This big head on this kind of tiny neck bobbling around.
So this is another pair of birds you can tell apart really well by their silhouette because of the basically the slanting forehead of the common goldeneye, the steeper forehead of the Barrow's goldeneye. There's really a different shape, different silhouette. Certainly on the females, the bill works, helps, but if you're seeing one without much light, it might be a little hard to get the details.
Yeah, you look at this in here. Whoops, sorry. So this is a sloping, more sloping, and this is more steep up and back. Another member of the same family, the bufflehead, and our smallest diving duck. They are found just about everywhere. The females have this white cheek spot. The males are a lot of white on them all around the head and the whole bottom part of their body. Just a black front of their head, neck, and they're pretty easy to spot, especially in the light. From a distance, this is what they look like. Again, they reflect iridescence.
And they do breed in Eastern Washington. I mean, not in great numbers, but we have them here in the Okanagan Highlands breeding, and most of them up in Canada.
Yeah. Any questions about the golden eyes, buffleheads?
We had one question from Eliana asking, is there something about Birch Bay that prevents us from seeing more scoters? I tend not to see them except in Boundary Bay, Blaine area. Am I just not seeing them at the right time? I am new to this.
Wow.
Yeah, there's quite a few scoters in Birch Bay that I've seen. How about you, Paul?
Yes, I mean, they're there, maybe not in as great a concentration, but if you look along the shoreline by the state park, you'll definitely see scoters. And it might well be because they're diving for bivalves. They need a little more depth in the water, and probably right along the community of Birch Bay, it's shallower. So it might be if they got out a little bit more to the edge of the town in either direction, they're there. I know. We were counting them just a few weeks ago. So
Yeah. Yeah, so go out different times and go either further north or further south around the bay where there's a little bit more depth. Okay. Ready to move on to the Mergansers? It's a common merganser. It's a pretty good sized bird. A lot of white on its body for the breeding male. This orange bill, little hook on the end. They actually have a serrated bill. The common and red-breasted mergansers do. I don't know about the hooded. And the female, or a non-breeding male, has this punky hairdo kind of thing going with an orange bill with a hook on the end. They mostly eat fish, but they will also eat worms and crustaceans, frogs, mammals, birds, plants, whatever they can get their beak on. They are ground and cavity nesters on freshwater lakes. So may put their nest in some brush at the edge of a pond or lake. A hooded merganser. They're pretty easy to tell. This hood can be raised or lowered. They can make this actually pretty small so that it just looks like they have a black head, but they do have this white breast, white markings here, this gorgeous chestnut, this kind of uppy tail, both of them have, and a long kind of thin bill. They are cavity nesters as well, and will often dump their eggs into a wood duck nest. So the wood duck then, if she sits on it, she gets stuck with all of the babies that hatch and raising them. And I think Paul has said that a lot of times that happens because there aren't a lot of holes in standing logs that are large enough to accommodate all of the birds that want to lay eggs. And then the red-breasted merganser, we see these quite often out at Semiahmoo and Drayton Harbor. The male has this punk bunch of feathers sticking up, has this kind of gorgeous chestnutty patterned breast, white in here, gray, beautiful gray in here. Female has again punk, and they have orange bills that are long and serrated. When I see them going along, they look to me like a whole fleet of some sort of a Navy battleship. They just all sort of go along at the same speed. And that's kind of how I can tell them from a distance. Oh, look, mergansers. They do a courting curtsy, kind of like the golden eyes, but instead of throwing their head back over their back, they just sort of bob their chest down in the water. They nest in brush piles, seashore or inland on lakes and whatnot.
So the red-breasted merganser is primarily a saltwater bird here on their winter, winter habitats. But the common merganser is primarily a freshwater bird, so we don't see them intermixing very often. But about a month ago, there were just a bunch of common mergansers on Drayton Harbor, which really surprised me. And I think they were probably because of the cold weather coming on, but we must have seen probably close to 100 of them out there that day. That was very exciting.
And was
Beautiful,
that the day?
Beautiful birds.
And was that the day that everybody was feeding on a big herring ball out there?
Well, that's what we think it probably was. Yes,
Yeah,
they were definitely
sort of
cormorants and mergansers just going crazy out on Drayton Harbor. So.
You can very often see good numbers of common mergansers at the south end of Lake Whatcom near the Whatcom Land Trust Lady of the Lakes property. If you go out that little creek, in fact, in November, if you go out middle of November, you'll see spawning kokanee salmon, kokanee. And then if you go all the way out to the lake, you'll see big numbers of common mergansers there. If you ever happen to be up in Whatcom County. Any questions about the mergansers?
None in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you. So on to some dabbling ducks. And here's our favorite dabbling duck, mallard. Almost everybody knows them because we just know them. There are so many of them. One of the things that they have, which is distinctive both in males and females, is the speculum that starts with white, black, blue, black, white. And both the male and the female have that. So that's lots of times if you're having trouble with a female duck, take a look for that speculum. Although these are drakes and eclipse plumage, the females do have that speculum as well. And I guess we should say something about a little bit about dabbling ducks and eclipse plumage. Do you want to talk about that, Paul?
Yes, well, our dabbling ducks spend a very short time, about 2 months, I think, at the most, in that area, actually out of breeding plumage. And after they breed on fresh water, the males drop most of their flight feathers at the same time. So they have a period of time where they do not fly. So they spend a few weeks fairly flightless, hanging in late summer, kind of hanging out in the marshes and things. And by fall, they're all ready to go. And slowly they get their breeding plumage back. And probably by September, they are looking pretty much like themselves again. So it's called eclipse, and it's basically their non-breeding plumage, just a short, about 3 months of their lives.
Yeah, and they have to find a place where they're safe because they can't fly. So they'll be on a pond or a lake or kind of hidden away somewhere so that the predators can't find them. Another one we have around here, a very elegant duck, is the northern pintail. I think they're gorgeous. They have these beautiful tertials that hang down here, but they have this long tail, beautiful blue and black bill, white stripes up the side of their head. This is the breeding male or even wintering male. And the female, another elegant duck, no speculum, but and also a blue bill, probably not the orange of the mallard if you're having trouble telling them apart. They breed in marshes and grasslands around ponds and salt marshes too, up in this area. We get good numbers of them in Drayton Harbor in the winter, and they will eat grains, aquatic plants, insects, crustaceans, and snails.
So something you can see very well on these pintail pictures is where the legs and the feet are situated on a dabbling duck. All our dabbling ducks can walk around on land, and they do it very well. While all of those diving ducks we were looking at have their legs farther back, and they're not so good on land. Some of them don't come out of the water very much at all. So dabbling ducks, and probably most of you know this, can spring right off the water, but because they push themselves right straight up with their feet and off they go, while all those diving ducks have to take a run across the water to get started. So by the way a bird takes off, you can tell a lot about them.
That's a good note. Here is some gadwalls. They're another beautiful, elegant duck, and again, they're in patterns. This is kind of tweedy looking, and then they've got these gorgeous feathers that lay over the back. They do have this white in here and a very dark back. Even the female has that black and white in here. And again, you can't see it, but when they fly, they've got this gorgeous chestnut right in front of their speculum. And they breed in seasonal wetlands, semi-permanent wetlands, and they eat a lot of greenery, but they will also eat seeds and invertebrates. Here's a widgeon, American widgeon. It has this, the male has this white patch here. They used to call them bald pate, and this green area around the eye. Again, if you see the back of them, you see this white area and this black pointed tail area. Even in flight, you can see the white and the black. The female, they both have blue on their bill and black on the tip. Oops, sorry. No speculum here. There's another breed that I didn't even put a picture in. It's called a Eurasian widgeon, in which case this head is orange, gorgeous, kind of orangey brown, and this patch is a cream color. You'll find them one in every 500 of the American widgeon flocks, probably. Or
And I'd be curious as if someone could give us some information about how many they see down in the Skagit area, because when we get away from the border, we don't see them very much. But I know I've been, at times when we could, birding up in British Columbia, I would see on Boundary Bay, maybe a tenth of the widgeon I saw were actually Eurasian widgeon. So I'm curious as to whether they get them down there in any numbers. And so maybe Tim or someone else can let us know.
yeah. And here's another dabbling duck, which is a great duck. It's hard to mistake them for anything else because they're called a shoveler. Their Latin name, spatula. And of course, that has to do with this big honking beak on both the male and the female. They'll eat all kinds of things. They very often, their feeding strategy is very interesting. They'll get in a big circle, or even if there's 3 ducks, they'll get in a circle of 3 ducks, and they'll go round and round and round and round, stirring up food from in the pond or the lake or wherever they are. If there's 20 of them, there'll be 20 of them in a big circle. And if there's 3, there'll be 3 in a circle. But they do have a bright green head and a golden eye, like a mallard, but they have this chestnut side, the white breast, kind of like a mallard, but mallards don't have this big white spot at the back of their body, and they definitely don't have this big spatulate bill. And a very small duck, 12 to 16 inches, is a green winged teal, and they have brown, gorgeous brown chestnut kind of on their head and the green, and a green speculum. They have this buttery looking patch at their rump and a stripe here. And this is mostly how I recognize them, as this stripe. Here's one, the green speculum, the buttery patch here, and the females have that green speculum as well. And they're small, very small, and you can see how that speculum has a black patch to it and a green. They breed in meadows, open woodlands, and brush near open water up in the Canada and the Arctic. And they eat lots of things, seeds, grasses, all kinds of vegetation, insects, larvae, mollusks, crustaceans. They're pretty generalist eaters.
So these little guys weigh about 1/3 of what a mallard does. They're pretty small, but you do see them quite a bit along in tidal areas, where, especially estuaries where streams are coming in. They like mud, and they like feeding there. So you do see them in the saltwater habitat quite a bit. I don't know that I've ever seen a gadwall on saltwater waterfront. I'm sure it must happen sometimes, but personally, I've not encountered it. So some of these ducks, like shovelers, less. I mean, I have seen shovelers on saltwater, but again, not very often. I think probably when we get freeze-ups, that forces them out there again. So.
Mm-hmm. And the habitat sometimes can tell you a whole lot about what sort of a duck you're going to be looking for. I most commonly see these green-winged teals in the slough or of Salish River, right behind the Longhorn Saloon in Edison. And also along the little creek that comes out at Blaine, right? As you go around the roundabout, you park in the first slot there at the Marine Park in Blaine. They are often along that muddy area, and by the boat launch. When the tide is out, the gadwalls I most often have seen in Lake Washington in Seattle, and on fresh water. There are great numbers of them at Lake Washington, which is the only. I mean, I was like, what kind of a duck is that? Boy, that's a looker. So, any questions or comments about the dabbling ducks?
Tim Mans chimed in with a note about what he's seen in the Skagit area for Eurasian and American widgeons, to kind of clarify your question. He said, I don't know the proportions of Eurasian to American widgeon in the Skagit, but I would say that in any large flock of American widgeon here, you can usually find 1 or 2 Eurasians. Mm-hmm. Once in a while, someone will spot a flock with only Eurasians as well.
Okay.
Oh my.
Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you for that. It's always interesting to hear other people's experiences of where and what they see. It's pretty neat. Okay. So now we're going to cover a group of birds called Alcids, and they fly through the water. They feed on fish, crustaceans, and marine invertebrates. And they're primarily pelagic or sea-going birds. You find them out in deeper water than our bays, although we will see a few of them in our area. Not very many common murres. They have a very dicey reproductive strategy, 1 egg on a rock shelf, usually coastal. And they take very good care of their 1 egg, as you can see this family down here. This is typical breeding. I think the way the light is hitting this one, it makes it look very different, but you can tell it's the same bird because of the bill. Even in the non-breeding, where they are again, gray and white or dark and white, light, the bill is still very much a common murbill. And you can see how far back on their body their legs sit. This is very much like grebes and loons. They don't spend a lot of time out of the water. Another one is the pigeon guillemot. In breeding plumage, it's all black with these white wing patches, orange legs, and the inside of their mouth is orange as well. They're pretty stunning. And they lay 1 to 2 eggs in a crevice or burrow in high bank off of marine waters generally. And in non-breeding plumage, they are this kind of nondescript, dark and light pattern. We see these typically, the only place that I've seen them in is off of Semiahmoo Spit at the very end dock. And I don't know, Paul, if you've seen them in other places along Drayton Harbor or Semiahmoo Spit.
Yeah, I've seen them around Sandy Point and
Okay.
around Point Whitehorn also. So I think we've
Oh,
got
yes.
some bluffs there that are
Mhm.
big enough for them to be breeding in,
Yeah,
nesting
Point
their
Whitehorn
burrows.
for sure. I've just
Mhm.
never seen them out there. Yeah. And on Whidbey Island, there are many of them because they have big colonies there. Marbled murrelet, perhaps the most dicey breeding strategy. Find a big, broad, old growth limb with moss on it, lay your egg there, and then travel as far as you need to travel to feed your baby, which may be up to 50 or 60 miles. Whereas it wasn't like that. Paul has pointed out to me when we first came here, the old growth forest was 20 feet from the water, and it was much easier to feed your babies. So there were probably many more of them around. But in breeding plumage, they are this brown color to be camouflaged in the forest. And in non-breeding, they are this, again, dark and light patterns on them. They still have the same bill shape, the same head tilt, whether they're breeding or non-breeding. The only place I've ever seen these is off of the point there at Washington Park, where the stairs go down. I don't know what that's called, but you folks from Anacortes and Skagit County can probably tell us where that is and where else you may have seen these. We do have some breeding pairs on Red Mountain up here and are trying to save that habitat for them. Ancient murrelets. Have you seen these up here, Paul?
I have. I've seen them off of Point Roberts. I've seen them and
Okay.
off of Washington Park also.
Okay. And so again, they're the same shape in breeding and non-breeding, but they have slightly different patterns. They have more white here on the head in breeding, more dark on the head in non-breeding. And they'll breed in colonies offshore forested islands in a burrow or a fallen log. And then rhinoceros auklet. In breeding, they grow this little horn here so that the females think they're quite attractive. I find it quite attractive personally, along with these streaks of white on their head, the mustache here, the malar, whatever it is, and the little streak here. And in non-breeding, they're just, again, dark, but still the same shaped bill. Paul, you can talk more about these guys if you want.
Well, they're a pretty distinctive bird. You know, they're kind of halfway to being a puffin, and they really have a silhouette on the water like none other. I mean, I don't see them from shore very often. I've seen more of them from being out on boats or on ferries, but that thick bill just getting wider right into the face is pretty distinctive. And I think they're a pretty charming bird in their own way. The common murre and the rhinoceros auklet are about the same size. The murre a little bit larger, And of course, then the other ones we've mentioned, the mirlets and the guillemot are really quite a bit smaller.
Yeah. And again, one egg in a burrow on a forested island in colonies of the East and West Pacific. So I guess we're on the East Pacific. Any questions or comments about the Alcids?
We had a couple comments from Erica Blakey and Tim Mans about marbled murrelets.
Yay.
Tim says that Green Point in Washington Park is where you can see them, as well as off Rosario Head in Deception Pass State Park.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
And Erica noted that she's seen them in Cypress Island Aquatic Reserve.
Wonderful.
And John Day had a question or statement. Have seen ancient murrelets off east side of Guimas.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And I've seen them at those and murres and rhinoceros auklets at the Clinton Ferry dock area, just east of there, out in that channel. So thank you for your comments. It's wonderful to know where to find them and where to look for them. So we're going to cover a few of the gulls. And the gulls pretty much eat small fish, marine invertebrates, lizards, insects, eggs, chicks of seabirds, and they scavenge carrion and refuse. So you'll find them quite often around Walmart parking lots, McDonald's, Taco Bell, things like that. So here's a pretty small gull, the Bonapartes. In breeding plumage, it's got this gorgeous black head and black wingtips, these orange legs. In non-breeding, you can see the legs have become pink and they have this spot here and they have a black bill. They're pretty hard to mistake for any other kind of gull. They breed around lakes and marshes in the boreal forest, winter along lakes, rivers, and marshes, beaches along coasts. And these guys nest with an open cup of twigs in a tree or bent over rushes. Imagine nesting in a tree if you're a gull. It's kind of like nesting in a tree if you're a duck, I guess. Here are mew gulls, the next largest. They are pretty easily told because they have black wingtips. They're white in breeding on their head, a yellow, pretty respectable but not honkin' bill, and yellow legs. And in non-breeding plumage, they have this darkish head, again, black wingtips, yellow legs, and a yellow bill. And what I think of these guys as cute because they're smaller than the other gulls, and they're not as huge and hunky looking. They breed in tundra, marshy areas, streams, islands, coastal cliffs, and they winter in nearshore waters, coasts, river estuaries, beaches, mudflats, harbors, sewage outfalls, and treatment ponds. So there you have it. We see them in good numbers in the Sunset parking lot, Sunset shopping center parking lot in the winter, and also out at Drayton Harbor and Semiahmoo. They nest with a shallow cup of vegetation, sometimes placed in a tree or on the ground. And they put stones in the middle of their nest.
Of course, they're only here in winter. So I mean, their breeding is all in Alaska and BC. So they're welcome here in winter, and they have a great time out in our agricultural fields too.
Yeah. And then the next largest gull, a ring-billed gull. In breeding, they're pretty spectacular. They have yellow legs, black wingtips, an orange bill with a ring around it. Then they've got this light eye with a red ring around the eye. And in non-breeding, the only difference is that they have this darker feathers on the head. They lay their eggs in a hollow in the ground. They breed in colonies on the ground near water, and they winter along our rivers, marshes, bays, and coasts. And we see them in the winter at Drayton Harbor and at Semiahmoo.
Definitely in
And-
smaller numbers, but there's always a few around, it seems.
And probably in Bellingham Bay, I think.
Mhm.
Here's our most common gull around here, the glaucous wing gull. It is the only gull that has not black wingtips. It's got a gorgeous grayish blue back and the same color of wingtips if they're a purebred. And an adult has this beautiful white head and neck and breast, big, enormous bill, and a red tip on the bottom of it so that the baby gulls will open their beaks and the adult gulls can regurgitate into their mouths. Yum. So they roost in fields, dumps, and parking lots. They forage at sea, they forage everywhere. Nest is a scrape in the ground filled with grass, sometimes bones, string. They can often nest in colonies, also on flat roofs. They will nest. This is a juvenile. It's very dark colored, and the first year juvenile has an all black bill. These guys have pink legs and feet, and they're large. They're our largest gull, along with our western gull. The non-breeding or
Juvenile?
I'm going to say that's not right. I'm going to say that's juvenile, not non-breeding.
Mhm.
Because the
right.
non-breeding, I apologize for that, folks. The non-breeding gull is it looks like a breeding western gull with gray spots in here, just like the non-breeding ring-billed gull. But they have black wingtips and they have a very dark back. So if you see a gull that has a medium dark back with black wingtips, what you're looking at is probably most likely a hybrid glaucous wing western gull. Western gulls have light irises and glaucous wing gulls have dark irises. That's really kind of one of the only definitive ways. They're also found further out on the coast from Squim west, generally, but they've hybridized so much that we get good numbers of the hybrid gulls here in Semiahmoo, Birch Bay, all up and down the coast here. So I'm going to caution you that this is a juvenile western gull. And the difference between it and the juvenile glaucous wing is that they are more patterned brown with more patterning in them than the juvenile glaucous wing, which is more gray overall. And these are both of these, Paul, are these both 3-year birds? They are, aren't they?
They are, yes. And
So
the
talk
western,
some more about that.
well, the western, I was going to say the western gull has some of the darkest wingtips too in the juvenile, so it's pretty distinctive in its own way. Yeah, so the smaller gulls, like the ring-billed gull, is a 2-year bird, while the western and the glaucous winged are 3 years that it takes them to reach maturity. So there's a in between the two what come on, plumages we're looking at here is there's a stage where they have gray mantles and they still have brown in the wingtips. So
Right.
you can tell second year, and by the third year they've got their full adult breeding plumage.
Okay. And then we talked a little bit earlier in the presentation about Heermann's gulls and breeding and non-breeding, and that they nest on arid offshore islands, usually Southern California or Northern Baja, or they winter. They come up here in late summer, early fall, and they're usually looking like this. Quite a beautiful bird. But you may see them in your surveys. Okay. And then we're gonna look at the Caspian tern, breeding and non-breeding. Big flat head with a black cap on it, black legs. They eat almost entirely fish. They're colony nesters, breed in a wide variety of habitats along water. Generally just a scrape on the ground or on a rooftop. They love big gravel pits that are close to water. They have a very distinctive call. They sound like a cat on fire. And then another bird that we get here quite often is the black oyster catcher. And they eat mollusks, especially mussels and limpets. And they spend their entire life in or near intertidal habitats. And we have a little resident group of them up at Semiahmoo because they will nest on the breakwater right underneath the cormorants. And maybe 10 years ago, there was only 2 of them around. And almost all the time now we can find 4 to 6, even 8 of these guys. And I think that they just hang around. I've seen them in a little lagoon adjacent to the Post Point heron colony as well. So,
Definitely, I think Skagit can count more of those than we can here in Whatcom County, because
yeah.
I've seen them along the Swinomish Slough on the the south end, along the breakwater there, just dozens and dozens of them in the
Really?
fall.
Nice.
Yes, beautiful birds.
Okay, so any questions about the gulls, terns, or the oyster catchers? Or comments even?
Yeah, we have a question from Eliana. I've seen gulls and eagles feeding in fields on something of great interest. Are they interested in some special nutrient?
They might well be finding something dead out there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, one of the things that they do commonly in Skagit Valley is the eagles especially, and gulls, will feed on the placenta, the afterbirth of the cows that give birth there. You will see great numbers of them in the fields with the cows. So the gulls would certainly pick up on that. They're scavengers too. Any other ideas about that from other folks?
Not seeing anything in the chat right now, but I'll let
Okay.
you know if I see anything pop up.
Okay. Well, that covers all the birds. With all of our presentations, we try to do a little bit of birding ethics for walkers, boaters, and kayakers to promote the welfare of birds and their environment and not approach them too closely, especially if they're nesting. Respect the laws and property rights of others, so don't go on private property unless you have permission. Minimize any disturbance to nesting species, comply with instructions in posted areas. Birds resting and feeding on sandbars or mud flats should not be disturbed. That gives you permission to yell at people who let their dogs loose in those areas. If you happen to find or are a fishing person, please pick it up, dispose of it properly. If you are fishing, catch a bird by accident, reel it in carefully, remove the fishing line as carefully as possible, and protect yourself because it may try to defend itself against you helping it. If you're in a boat that has a motor, keep your boat in good repair. And please don't feed any birds or other wild animals from your boat. So that's our presentation, and we'll take any comments, questions now. This is where you can reach us. And you can check out our website, northcascadesaudubon.org, or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are an all volunteer organization. So none of us are paid staff. We just do this for the love of birds.
Thank
In
you
closing,
so much.
go ahead.
Thank you so much. I learned so much in this hour and a half. And my husband and I go out regularly onto Birch Bay and I would love to participate in the bird counts. I just didn't feel confident enough in identifying the birds. And we have all kinds of books. Books are so hard because
Yeah.
you go out, we have 2 or 3 texts and we're rifling through them, and the birds don't look quite like what we see in the photographs. But this was
Yeah.
really helpful because you included their behavior, which is really important in finding, because when you're especially dealing with very small numbers, the light is behind them.
Yep.
And you're seeing them in silhouette,
Mhm.
and you're trying to distinguish between this bird and that bird. This was extremely helpful.
Oh, good.
I want to get confident enough so that we can
Right.
participate in the surveys and be
Right.
credible,
Well, we hope to be having field trips opening up in the fall.
Really? Oh, excellent.
And so look on our website for
Okay.
field trips. Another thing that will be your best friend, and I know this is very hard to do, but take a sketchbook with you and draw the bird.
I
Draw
have
it
no
as-
problem with that. I was an art major, so I can do that.
So
That's
draw
great.
it. So if you can draw that bird in silhouette without any colors on it and just point to where the colors are, you can take that back to your field guide. See, the birders, the real hardcore birders in Europe and England would not be caught dead with a field guide. They have their note, their journal that they take out with them, and they draw the bird, talk about the habitat, talk about the time of year, talk about the weather, and that will give you more insight into identifying birds than flipping through a field guide out there while you're not able to look at the
Well,
bird.
a field guide is just so hard. You're
Yeah,
trying to manage binoculars and these books, and
rain. Yeah,
they never look quite like what you're offered as the
right.
options. So
And
no.
and make sure it's a Right in the Rain sketchbook.
Yeah,
I
no
wanted-
worries. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to mention that Cornell has an online course on nature field guides, not
Yeah.
nature field guides, but nature journaling,
Yes.
and talks about the gestures too that birds make. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
in closing, I wanted to say that, we sure could have included a lot more birds, but I think none of us could have sat here much longer. But there, and then the talk about gulls, I mean, we scratched the surface on gulls, but we talked about the major plumages that you see, and gulls are something I'm still learning about.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
So I don't know if in your counts you're going to actually list gulls by species, but it's a challenge, and I don't want everybody to think that we give you all the information there is, because
Mm-mm.
there's a lot more out there, and I'm
This
still
was,
learning.
yeah, very, very scratchy. And thank you so much for having us. It was great
Yeah, of course.
to be at.
There are some
Yeah.
thank yous going on in the chat. John Day had another question asking if we see ruddy ducks up north. Used to see them at the head of Fidalgo Bay in the winter back in the 80s.
You know,
Yeah.
this,
Well, once in a
this
while, we
year-
see them on Drayton Harbor.
yeah, this year I haven't seen any ruddies, but I haven't been out there as much as usual either. But yes, at Drayton Harbor, usually in winter, we would see ruddies out on the water. So I don't know. I don't know if they're not there or if I just haven't been out there at the right times.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone have any last questions or comments or thank yous?
Thank you, Rondi, for keeping us all straight.
Oh, of course. My pleasure. Thank you so much, both of you, Pam and
Yeah.
Paul, for coming tonight. Much appreciated. I learned very much as well.
Thank you
And,
so much for the, as a new marine birder or birder, just thank you for all the information you shared.
You're welcome. And
Deeply treasured.
yeah, and thank you all for the feedback you gave us on where you can find birds in your area, because that will help people get out looking for birds. Tim just put in the chat that there are ruddy ducks on some pond or something. Where
Yeah.
are they?
In Lake Erie on Fidalgo,
Like
on
Erie on
Fidalgo Island.
Yeah.
Fidalgo.
Great.
Okay. Great. Yeah, there's birds everywhere. So just get out there and look and hone your skills and keep working on it. You'll get better the more you do it. So thanks.
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to see you all.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Tim.
Good to see you. Hope to see you on field trip soon.
Yeah, we'll see you again.
All right. Well, this looks like we're going to wrap up.
Thank you, Rondi.
Thank you so much and
Yeah.
have a good rest of your evening.
You too. And
Good night.
thanks so much, Paul, for all your help.